I want to talk about mistakes. Big mistakes. I've been working on this comic for almost 2 years and I'm still at the beginning. Get comfy, grab a cup of tea and a snack as I explain to you how and why this has taken me so long and how you can avoid the exact same mistakes. And because just looking at me will get boring fast, here's a time lapse of the comic in question, at least in its current form. Because I've technically already released this comic before. It's no longer available anywhere online except my Patreon page because it started to make me feel like no other comic before it has. Angry. The inspiration for wanting to do this comic came from my first ever comic convention as a creator. I was looking at the other comic creators around me and marveled at how much they had in comparison to me. I knew I needed a new book and I needed one fast, and so I started brainstorming in between the few sales I was generating over the weekend. And here's what I came up with. Wait, you can't see anything on the screen? Oh, right. That's because I came up with nothing. Nada. Sweet FA. So I turned to the one person I could trust in my time of need, the internet. The internet is never wrong. I started Googling public domain stories and almost immediately skipped over the fairy tales. It felt like they had been done to death and that if I did one, I'd basically be doing what Disney has been doing for decades, and I wanted to be different. So I looked at mythology instead. I went through the Egyptians, Romans and Greeks before I settled on the myth of Persephone and Hades. I liked this one because it was short and it was a pretty easy story to tell. The villain captures the girl and she is torn between two realms. It's kinda like Bowser kidnapping Princess Peach. For those who know this myth, you'll know it deals with a dark topic, and after doing some more digging, I started to really realize this myself. So I decided to change it. To what? Well, you'll have to read it when it's ready. With that slight edit done, I was ready to start the character designs. And so I turned to Disney. Wait, didn't I want to be different from them? Oh yeah, never mind. Hercules is an awesome movie and I loved the way the gods were depicted in that, so I stole the idea. I wanted my gods to be colourful just like in Hercules. I also wanted to have a cartoony-ish style so that the comic would be quick for me to draw. I'd never done a vertical scroll comic before and I wanted to have that experience. I knew that if I went for a detailed style, then I'd struggle to keep up with the schedule, so it made the most logical sense. And with these character designs sorted, I was ready to start drawing. I felt so confident and figured this would do better than my previous comics I'd posted. And things were going really well. That is until my wife tapped me on the shoulder and told me to check out this comic called Olympus. If you've been on Webtoon for more than 5 seconds, you'll have heard of this comic. The only reason I didn't look at Webtoon as part of my research is because I genuinely didn't think a comic like this would be on there. Especially considering that most of the comics on that site seem to involve Japanese high schools and often have weird relationships that, well, it's not for me. But if you love it, then great. I'm not judging. Anyway, the point is that I couldn't have been more wrong. And it goes to show that rigorous research pays off. When she told me about this comic that was also dealing with Greek myths, I was actually really excited about that. It meant that there was an appetite for it, and so it wouldn't be as difficult for me to get people interested. But then I actually read it. Not only is the Greek myth the exact myth that I'm exploring, but the characters are both cartoony and brightly coloured. Now my excitement turned into full-blown anxiety. I sat there thinking what I should do. It wouldn't be the last time I was faced with a difficult choice to make. I knew I didn't want to start over. I was months into this process, and the more I read Olympus, the more I realised that our interpretations were very different of the original text. So even if they looked similar, they certainly wouldn't have played out similarly. So I pushed on. I also decided to stop reading Olympus at this point because I didn't want to even subconsciously start becoming influenced by it. I had several episodes in the bank and I was ready to start releasing them, and things were slow, but I was expecting that. It is rare to explode onto the scene in a market like Webtoon and Tapas, and I'm long enough in the tooth to know that it wouldn't happen to me. I was happy with the upload schedule and I felt that I could get the entire first book done within 12 months, which was ideal. 20 episodes, nice and tidy. But by the time I got to around episode 8 and 9, I started to feel self-conscious about the comic. This feeling is very familiar. Usually when I draw, I tend to hate 95% of what I make. My standards are often ridiculous and borderline cruel for myself. This is common among many artists, and as long as you do your best, you should ignore that inner voice in your head. And that's what I did at first, but then I started feeling something new, anger. But I put that to one side and carried on, but it kept coming back stronger and stronger to the point where I had to address it. Why was this comic making me angry? I stepped away, breathed, and looked over the comic trying to find the source of my rage. And it was halfway through episode 10 and halfway through the entire comic that I realized why I was feeling so angry. I wasn't trying. The comic wasn't being created with love or passion, it was being created to get to the deadline as quickly as possible. And that fact pissed me off. I wasn't applying myself, and it felt like I was self-sabotaging the work I was making while I was making it. So again, I found myself at a crossroads and had two options. Do I keep pushing forwards down this path, or do I take a new one? Usually I advocate for pushing forwards. Just create the thing and then create an even better thing after. You can't get good at making comics unless you make lots of comics, and that's the reason I originally decided to press on despite those doubts. But if the thing you are creating is making you feel not doubt or self-critical, but legitimately angry, then maybe pushing forwards isn't the best move. And that's exactly what I thought for myself too. I had to kill the comic. So I did. I removed it from Tapas and Webtoon and decided to start from the beginning. I'd grown to love the characters though, and so I wanted to stay with the same myth, but I also wanted to rewrite it. I also realized that I don't really love the vertical scroll format as a creator. There are some interesting things you can do with it, don't get me wrong, but I prefer the traditional layout of a comic. So I rewrote the comic and made even more changes to the story, and I ended up with a better written comic as a result, so that was nice. And when it came to the character designs, well, I went from these to these. Personally, I think these are better. I think the only influence Olympus has over me is my decision not to make the characters have colourful skin tones. At least most of them. I like the idea, but it's not super important for the story, and so I'm happy to drop it. As an artist, you can play with the lighting anyway, which helps set the mood, so it's not like you can't have vibrant colours that influence a character's skin tone. And I'd probably get bored of electric pink anyway. I'm going to delve more into the art side of things in a future video, but I wanted to show you where I was versus where I am now. Ultimately, what I wanted to do was correct the mistakes I made. There's a psychological framework called the stages of learning, which explains how people become more competent when learning a skill. You start off at unconscious incompetence, where you're making mistakes and don't even realize you're making them. Then you level up to conscious incompetence, where you're still making mistakes, but you can start to address them. Then conscious competence, where you're not making mistakes because you're consciously thinking about them. And finally, unconscious competence, where you seem naturally good at the thing. I wanted to go from that first stage to the next stage up at least. I knew I'd make a load of new mistakes, but I wanted to at least start correcting the mistakes I'd made the first time round. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was not planning enough. I did almost zero prep work for the drawings the first time around, which meant I was at risk of forgetting details and making the characters inconsistent. Inconsistency in character design isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're choosing to do it, but that's another conversation for another day. So I created character sheets and expression sheets and would doodle the characters over and over again, going through the stages of learning until I felt comfortable with them. I made some T-poses, but I'll level with you, I find T-poses unbelievably boring to draw. So I only did like 3 of them and then I gave up. I also wanted to utilize 3D as part of my prep. You'd want to use 3D models for the sake of consistency. If you model out a room, you know that the vase you put in the corner is going to stay in that same corner no matter where the camera goes, so it's a really useful skill to learn. I spent several months at this stage and have been noodling away at them since the start of the year, which basically brings me to today. I'm now officially drawing this comic. It's going to be around 110 pages long, and I'm predicting it will take a few years to get it done. Maintaining this YouTube channel, having a full-time job and being a father and husband means I don't have a huge amount of time or energy, so I'm trying to work smart with this one. And that prep work has so far been incredibly useful for me. The aim of these videos is to show you the process of making this comic. It's kind of a document for my own personal reasons, and hopefully it's of use or interest to you. Each week I'm going to pick a topic or two to talk about while I draw, so if there's anything you want me to talk about, I'm open to suggestions in the comments. And if you want to know more about these video series and get comic book tips, then sign up to my newsletter. I post once per week on a Sunday, and it's where I share tips, thoughts, and any resources I may find. Finally, if you want to support the channel, then have a look at my Patreon page. The link to both the newsletter and the Patreon are in the description. As of this recording, I'm not monetized on YouTube, and so Patreon is the best way to directly support this channel. Okay, plugs are over. I think that the biggest mistake I made for this comic was putting efficiency above anything else. I wanted to make the comic fast, and I didn't consider how that would impact the quality of the work and my relationship with it. I'm becoming better at finding the balance between efficiency and quality, and that will only get better over time. I also find that surrounding yourself with art and other artists really does make such a huge difference. I never used to really buy that and figured I could just do it all on my own. But just having a YouTube video on in the background, or a podcast of an artist talking about their art or drawing at the same time as you, has a profound impact. It's been something that I've only recently started to appreciate, which is another motivation for me doing these types of videos for the foreseeable. One thing I know for absolute certain is that I will not make the same mistakes again, and hopefully you won't make them in the first place. So if you take anything away from this video, remember to do your research and make decisions that serve the comic, not ones that serve a calendar or arbitrary deadlines. Thanks for watching.